Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita. For this exploration, we're looking at a really fascinating piece of research.
Yeah, this one's interesting.
And it's actually part of the session readings for the virtual summer school in entrepreneurship research 2025.
Oh, right. The summer school. It's great they're doing that again.
Absolutely. And, 2025, that's actually the fifth year for this initiative. It's a fantastic no-fee program started back in 2021.
5 years already. Wow. It's such a valuable resource for scholars in the field.
It really is. And we should definitely give a big thank you to the organizers. That's Professor Vishal K. Gupta and PhD candidate Athena Skidapubbu, both from the University of Alabama.
Yeah, definitely. Kudos to them for putting together such a unique opportunity.
For sure. So the paper they've selected, the one we're diving into today.
Right. It gets into a really compelling aspect of family businesses, doesn't it?
It does. We're going deep into how the interactions between women at the very top of family-controlled firms specifically, we're talking female CEOs and female directors, how that mix impacts, how well the companies actually perform.
And the source for this, you mentioned it's quite robust. It's that 2014 paper from Management Science.
That's one. Gender Interactions Within the Family Firm by Daniele Amore, Orsola, Garofalo, and Alessandro Minichilli.
And they use data on Italian family firms, right, over a decent period.
Yeah, a substantial data set, Italian family firms between 2000 and 2010. So it gives us a really solid window to look into these dynamics.
Okay.
So the mission for you listening today is really to grasp whether having more women in these key leadership roles, CEO, board director, in family businesses, actually changes things performance-wise.
And I think you mentioned it's not just a simple more women equals better story.
Not at all. That's what's really interesting here. The study found it's much more nuanced. It's the interplay between these female leaders that seems crucial, and some of the findings might be a bit surprising.
Okay, sounds good. Where do we start?
Well, the study kicks off by noting something we kind of already know. Women are still pretty underrepresented in top leadership globally. There's been a big push, obviously, to increase female representation.
Right, but what's fascinating here, like you said, is that while research on women in leadership is growing, the actual link to company performance has been, a bit mixed in the findings so far.
Exactly. So this paper really zooms in on the interactions, the relationships between women at the top. It suggests it's not just about counting heads, but about how they actually, work together.
And that feels quite intuitive when you think about it. The CEO and the board, they have to interact constantly.
Of course.
So the dynamics there, including gender dynamics, you'd expect them to have some kind of effect.
Precisely. And using that Italian data, the researchers found a really striking main result.
Which was?
Family firms with female CEOs tended to perform significantly better. But here's the key. When there were more women on their board of directors.
Ah, okay. So it's that combination.
It's the combination. And if you link this to some ideas, maybe from social psychology.
Yeah, you can see how that might work. Research sometimes suggests women might collaborate differently, maybe more effectively with other women in certain group settings.
Right.
And think about role models, too. Having other women there could maybe shift perceptions, reduce stereotype threat, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So it's not just having the female CEO in isolation, it's the whole environment she's operating within. The researchers suggest a couple of key reasons why having female directors could be so beneficial when the CEO is also female.
Okay.
One is that having other women in leadership could genuinely boost the confidence and maybe the self-esteem of that female CEO, especially if it's an industry or a boardroom that's typically very male-dominated.
The psychic costs, I think they might have mentioned.
Exactly. That potential burden of being the only one.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're constantly the outlier, it adds pressure.
Yeah.
Having allies, other women, could create a more supportive, less taxing environment psychologically.
For sure. And secondly, the paper suggests that a more, let's say, female-friendly culture at the top, which might be fostered by having more female directors, could lead to better communication.
Right, maybe more effective collaboration.
Yeah, and ultimately that could translate into better guidance and oversight for the female CEO from the board.
So the idea boils down to better dynamics through these interactions lead to better decisions, which leads to better financial results.
That's the hypothesis. And their initial look at the Italian data really seemed to back this up.
How strongly?
Well, they found that while just having a female CEO, maybe without many other women on the board, sometimes actually seemed to correlate with lower profitability.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But having a significant number of female directors alongside that female CEO led to a noticeable increase in the firm's profitability. They were talking almost a full percentage point increase in profitability in those specific situations.
That's quite substantial in terms of profitability metrics.
It really is, and here's where it gets really interesting. They didn't just stop there. They knew correlation isn't causation.
Right. They needed to dig deeper to understand the why and rule out other factors.
Exactly. They wanted to know if this effect held up under different conditions, and if they could be more confident it was actually the gender interaction driving it.
So what methods did they use to try and isolate that impact? These studies often use clever techniques.
They did. They used some pretty robust methods. For instance, they looked at changes in profitability before and after a company switched to a female CEO, compared that to firms switching to a male CEO, and then factored in the number of female directors.
Ah, the difference in differences, or even triple difference approach. Yeah, that helps control for underlying trends.
Right. And they also use something called propensity score matching.
Okay, so comparing like with like.
Essentially, yes. Trying to compare firms that looked very similar on key characteristics before a CEO change, but differed in whether they appointed a man or a woman, it helps make the comparison fairer.
Good, good. And did they do anything else to tackle potential endogeneity? You know, the chicken and egg problem.
They did, and this was quite clever. They used instrumental variables.
Okay, always a tricky but powerful technique if you can find good instruments.
Right. They tried to find factors that would influence the likelihood of a female CEO being appointed, but wouldn't directly affect the company's profits in the short term, at least not through other channels.
What instruments did they come up with?
One was whether the controlling family had a firstborn female child. The idea being this might increase the chance of a daughter eventually taking over, but wouldn't immediately impact profits today.
Interesting. Plausible, maybe?
And the second one related to Italy itself, those known regional differences in attitudes towards gender roles. More traditional in the south, generally more progressive in the north.
Ah, using regional norms as an instrument for the likelihood of female leadership.
Okay. And the key takeaway, even using these different, quite sophisticated methods to try and weed out alternative explanations.
The main finding still held.
It still held strong. That positive connection between a female CEO and better firm performance really seemed amplified when there were more female directors on the board.
Wow. That adds quite a bit of weight to the finding.
It does. But, like most things in the real world, it wasn't necessarily a universal effect. They did find situations where this positive impact seemed weaker.
Okay, so what were those conditions? Where did the effects seem to fade?
Well, one key factor was geography, tying back to that instrument, actually. In those regions of Italy known for stronger, more traditional gender stereotypes.
The positive effect on profitability was reduced.
Exactly. It was less pronounced there.
Which really underlines how much the broader societal context matters, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You can have a good internal dynamic, potentially, but if the external environment is pushing back with strong biases, it can dampen the benefits.
Makes sense.
What else?
Company size seemed to play a role.
Really?
In the larger firms within their sample.
The positive interaction effect was less noticeable.
Yes. Less noticeable impact on profitability there, which also seems plausible. Bigger organizations, more complex structures, maybe the influence of that top team interaction gets a bit diluted.
Could be. More inertia, perhaps more established processes that are harder to shift quickly.
And they mentioned one more condition, I think.
They did time of financial crisis. During periods of major economic stress, like the global financial crisis that hit during their study period.
The positive relationship was weaker then, too.
Weaker again. Maybe, they speculated, because crises push firms towards more risk-averse decisions, or perhaps a preference for more traditional leadership styles in turbulent times.
Interesting. So external shocks can also override these internal dynamics.
It seems so. Now, there's one more layer here that I found particularly insightful.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about the number of female directors. The type of female director really seemed to make a difference.
Ah, okay. How so? What distinction did they make?
They separated female directors who were members of the controlling family from those who were not family members, independent directors, essentially.
Okay, family versus non-family female directors. And what did they find?
They discovered that the positive impact, that synergy between a female CEO and female directors, was actually more significant when those female directors were not part of the family.
Really? So the benefit was stronger with independent female directors.
That's what the data suggested. It's a really powerful nuance.
It really is. Because it suggests just adding more daughters or sisters to the board might not yield the same governance benefits as bringing in outside female perspectives.
Exactly. It raises questions about the specific value that diverse, independent voices bring, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Non-family directors, female or male, are generally expected to bring different experiences, skills, networks.
More objectivity, perhaps?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Especially in a family firm context where lines can sometimes blur. So maybe independent female directors bring both that external viewpoint and contribute to that positive gender interaction effect we discussed.
It could be that combination. The researchers kind of touched on this, suggesting that in family firms where maybe management practices aren't always as formalized,
Right, because of the close relationships.
the presence of independent directors, and maybe particularly female independent directors in this case, could bring some much-needed rigor and a fresh perspective to how the firm is overseen.
A check and balance, combined with potentially enhanced collaboration.
Exactly. So just to kind of wrap up the key insights for everyone listening, from this deep dive into the Italian family firms between 2000 and 2010,
What should they remember?
well, first, that really interesting, nuanced relationship. Female CEOs tended to lead firms to better performance when they had more women on the board alongside them.
But importantly, just having a lone female CEO without that supportive female board presence sometimes even correlated with decreased profitability.
Right. Which really highlights the importance of the interactions among women at the top. It's not just about having women present, it seems, but about the dynamics created when they work together.
Those synergies appear to be critical for the positive outcomes.
And we need to remember the caveats, those conditions where the effect was weaker. Regions with strong gender biases.
Larger, more complex firms.
And times of major financial crisis.
And finally, that crucial distinction about the type of director.
Yes. That the positive impact was more pronounced when the female directors were independent, not family members, pointing towards the value of diverse external perspectives in the boardroom.
Okay, that's a clear summary.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with, based on all this. Given these findings, what are the bigger implications for how we think about building effective leadership teams, especially in closely held businesses like these family firms? Does this research suggest that maybe just focusing on hitting quotas, just increasing the number of women, might be less important than actively fostering an environment where diverse perspectives can genuinely interact and, be effective?
It certainly pushes in that direction, thinking beyond mere representation of the actual dynamics.
And it makes you wonder, what other, maybe less obvious dynamics might be at play when we consider other dimensions of diversity in organizations? Gender is one aspect, but what about others?
Yeah, lots to think about there regarding how diversity truly translates into performance. It's complex.
Definitely gives you something to mull over.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.